Many American students who just graduated from high school are enjoying their summers and busily preparing for college. While in Israel, the young men and women who recently graduated are preparing to enter the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. While we can probably relate better to the experiences of youth in the United States, the lives of these 18-year-olds across the world can teach us what it means to truly and intentionally dedicate ourselves to a greater purpose. Soon these young adult soldiers will be inducted into the Army during a ceremony in which they will make the following vow. I swear and obligate myself on my word of honor to remain loyal to the State of Israel, its laws, and its legitimate administration, and to devote all of my strength and even to sacrifice my life in defense of the homeland and the freedom of Israel. These are words not to be taken lightly. The Hebrew name of the ceremony is Tekes Hashba'ah. The word hashba'ah, or swearing in, is related to the Hebrew word shvuah, or vow. This week's Torah portion discusses the deep seriousness of vows. Our Torah portion, Matot, opens with the following. Moses spoke to the heads of the Israelite tribes, saying, "This is what Adonai has commanded. If a householder makes a vow to Adonai or takes an oath imposing an obligation on himself, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips." I cannot attest how many Israeli soldiers are aware of Moses' words, but the sincerity with which these soldiers carry out all that has crossed his or her lips is surely evident. I experienced the sincerity of this vow just over 2 years ago when I was working with a number of Israelis at URJ Camp Newman Swig in Santa Rosa, California. Early in the morning of July 12, 2006, more than 500 bleary-eyed counselors, unit heads, and campers gathered in the amphitheater for Yom Israel, or Israel Day. They were dressed in blue and white, in IDF apparel, in t-shirts with Israeli logos. Also on July 12th, however, a tragedy occurred in Israel. 8 Israeli soldiers were killed, and 2 more, Eldad Regev and Ehud Goldwasser, were abducted by the Iranian-based terror organization Hezbollah. With the recent knowledge of this news, the 30-plus members of the Mishlachat, the camp's Israeli delegation, consisting primarily of those currently serving in or recently discharged from the IDF, stood on stage trying to get everyone excited for the day. Some dressed in their army fatigues, others with smiling faces waving Israeli flags. The program began with a solemn explanation of what had happened in Israel, followed by a moment of silence to honor those who had died and were missing. Then, in true Israeli style, the celebration went forward. Yet, masked behind the celebratory affects, the Mishlachat was struggling. Realizing that those in combat, those being called back into duty from the reserves, those who were abducted, and those who had died could have just as easily been them. Then the news began to come in from a boyfriend in combat, through an email telling a member of the Mishlachat that 5 soldiers in his unit had just been killed, and by telephone calls from parents alerting their children that they had moved their family into bomb shelters. Fear and sadness pervaded the Mishlachat, a group of staff members who were so often known for their tough attitudes. They struggled the most not with the fact that a war was going on, but rather how to uphold their vows in the facing of this war. How could they remain loyal to the State of Israel and devote all their strength, even sacrifice their life, in the defense of their homeland while they were at Jewish sleepaway camps in Northern California? How could they uphold their sacred promise when they could not serve their country? In this week's Torah portion, the Israelites conquered the Midianites and were anticipating their entrance into Israel. Although there was still land left to conquer, 2 of the Israelite tribes, the Reubenites and the Gadites, asked for their share of land not to be in the main area of the conquered land of Israel. Rather, they asked it to be on the east side of the Jordan River, in an area good for raising their cattle. Moses scolds the Gadites and the Reubenites, saying, "Are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? If you turn away from God, you will bring calamity upon all of these people." 18th century Rabbi Yehonatan Eibschitz explains that the underlying meaning of the words, when your enemies attack Israel, you shall sit here, really means you will remain in peace in whatever country you are living in. Do not think so for an instant, because a war in defense of Israel is a war for the survival of the entire Jewish people, wherever they are. The Reubenites and Gadites and the Mishloachat all felt invested in one place, but were told to be in another. The Reubenites and Gadites wanted to be on the east side of the Jordan River, but were urged to come and fight on the other side. And the Mishloachat were urged to stay in the United States while they yearned to be in Israel. They both had responsibilities to uphold. The Gadites and Reubenites had sheep to tend, and the Mishloachat had American Jewish youth to care for. It is the difference between them, however, which is significant. The Reubenites and Gadites initially saw no reason to join the rest of the Israelites in Holy Land proper. Alternatively, what the Mishloachat felt reflects the words of Israeli poet Yehuda Halevi. My heart is in the east, but I am on the very edge of the west. The Mishloachat had internalized what Moses had to remind the Reubenites and Gadites. You cannot sit in one place while your brothers fight their enemies. A war in defense of Israel is essential to the entire Jewish people, wherever they are. While many of us sitting in this room prefer to stay away from a war-stricken land, the Mishloachat felt otherwise. The echo of their shvuah rang loud in their ears, and they yearned to return to the Jewish homeland to uphold their vow by defending the state of Israel. Moses eventually permitted the Reubenites and Gadites to settle on the east of the Jordan, so long as they first did their part in helping to conquer the rest of the land. The Mishloachat did not return to Israel, although many of them would have liked. What they did in the meantime, however, was most remarkable. They carried out their vow to defend their land and did so in the United States, at camp. They remained loyal to the state of Israel by continuing to educate American Jewish youth, by raising awareness of the situation to non-Israelis through educational programs and through prayer, and by participating in the San Francisco Israel Rally. They did not attempt to shirk responsibility like the Reubenites and Gadites initially did. They did not break their vows. Rather, they made sure that those whom surrounded them were aware of the significance of this war to the Jewish people, and at the end of the summer, they returned home to Israel to further uphold the vows. Last week, just over 2 years after their kidnappings, an exchange brought about the return of the bodies of Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev. The bodies were returned in exchange for the release of 200 bodies of Arab militants and 5 Lebanese prisoners. Regardless of whether we agree or do not agree with the price paid for the return of Goldwasser and Regev, the intention of the exchange was to honor and respect the lives of the soldiers who upheld their vows at the greatest of costs. Those of us sitting here tonight may have never had to say the shvuah, swearing and obligating ourselves to remain loyal to the state of Israel, to devote our strength and sacrifice our lives in defense of the Jewish homeland. But, as Rabbi Yehonatan Eibschutz rather prophetically pointed out over 200 years ago, our Torah teaches us not to stand idly by when enemies attack Israel, because a war in defense of Israel is a war for the survival of the entire Jewish people, wherever they are. We may not be sworn into the IDF, but we have taken the vow of being part of the Jewish people, and we have entered into the covenant that goes along with this. This vow, the shvuah, is not explicitly stated, and it is up to us to determine what the words might be. We ought to consider what our shvuah should say in regards to the Jewish people and the land of Israel. What can we promise to do at home and from afar? While we are in the West, what can we do to uphold our responsibility to the part of our heart that is in the East? If we could carve out our own vows, our own shvuot, and approach them with the same tenacity that we have seen the Israeli soldiers do, Just imagine the incredible strength we could add to the Jewish world. But we must be careful in verbalizing our vows, because once we have made them, we must do all that has crossed our lips. We must not make these vows half-heartedly. It is all or nothing. As Ecclesiastes teaches us, it is better that we should not vow at all than we should vow and not pay. So I urge you tonight to reflect on the great vow that Israeli soldiers take, members of the Mishlachat, Ehud Goldwasser, Eldad Regev, and consider if you can find something that moves you to commit yourself to the Jewish cause. The power is in our hands and our mouths, if only we would utilize it. Shabbat Shalom.